The Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm pleased to join my esteemed colleague from Maryland, who was here with a number of other people, to talk about the need to pass the Equal Pay Act to make sure that we end once and for all paycheck discrimination against women. I think the American people believe very strongly in fairness, equal treatment, and a level playing field for everyone, because these are core American values, and I think that's why people find it shocking and unacceptable that women in the United States continue to be denied equal pay for equal work. More than half a century ago, President Kennedy signed into law the Equal Pay Act, and yet today wage discrimination continues as an ugly reality across our nation. Women earn only about 79 cents for every dollar men earn, and it's a disparity that exists at all levels of education in nearly every industry across hundreds of occupations, from elite professionals to everyday blue-collar workers. There are complex factors that contribute to the gender pay gap, but according to a new study by the Joint Economic Committee, as much as 40% of the pay gap can be attributed just to outright discrimination. 40% discrimination. And I think probably most people who have watched TV in the last couple of weeks have seen one particularly egregious example that's been cited, and that is of the women's soccer team, the U.S. women's soccer team, whose members make only about 1/4 of what their male counterparts make. Both the women's and men's soccer teams work for the same employer, the U.S. Soccer Federation, but the women's team generates significantly more revenue than the men. It's won the Women's World Cup 3 times, including last year, has been Olympic champions 4 times, and has been the world's top-ranked team for nearly 2 decades. And yet they're paid only 1/4 of what men make. It's hard to understand that under any circumstances except outright discrimination. But as outrageous as that case is, the wage gap is really damaging to the women out there, the 40% of American women who are sole or primary breadwinners in households with children, to the women who are waitresses and certified nursing assistants and secretaries who work at jobs where equal pay is not only about fairness, but it's also about providing adequately for their families. It's about being able to afford internet access so their kids can do their homework. It's about paying for their child's inhaler. There is a lot that women breadwinners can do with that extra $10,800 that women would earn on average if it were not for pay discrimination. I also serve as the ranking member on the Senate's Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. And so I've seen how similar gender gaps confront women-owned small businesses. Just as women on average are paid 21% less than men, a recent Commerce Department study found that the odds of businesses owned by women winning a federal contract are about 21% lower than for otherwise similar companies, for male-owned enterprises. So, in workplaces across America, women are speaking up more and more, who are demanding equal pay. It's time for Congress to do our jobs as well. And I know from experience that legislation can make a difference. As governor, I signed a law to prohibit gender-based pay discrimination in New Hampshire and to require equal pay for equal work. Now, we haven't made as much progress as I would like at this point, but at the time we signed that law, women in New Hampshire were making 69% of their male colleagues' wages. Today, they're making 76%, or a little less than the national average. Back in the early 80s, I served on New Hampshire's Commission on the Status of Women, and I chaired a report on employment in New Hampshire. And at that time, women were only making 59 cents for every dollar a man earned. And the conclusion of that report was that this has an impact not just on women, but it's an impact on, of course, their whole family. It's something that their children, that their husbands, that their entire family is affected by. And if we can close this pay gap for women, it helps not only the women who make up 2/3 of minimum wage workers, but it helps their families. It helps pull their kids out of poverty. We need to do more at the federal level, and that's why I strongly support the Paycheck Fairness Act, because this legislation would empower women to negotiate for equal pay. It would close loopholes that courts created in the laws that are already in place, and it would create strong incentives for employers to obey these laws. This legislation is about basic fairness. It's about equal treatment. It's about creating a level playing field in the workplace for our daughters and our granddaughters and for every American. And it's also about making sure that their spouses, their children, their relatives benefit from making sure that they have the same access to equal pay as the men in the workplace do. So I urge my colleagues to support the Paycheck Fairness Act. 16 years into the 20th century, it is way past time to make good on our promise of equal pay for equal work in the United States. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.